Welcome back to Funky Politics, the hardest hitting political show on the planet. Hey, I am DC, your host of Funky Politics, and you know what? Got something for you. Have you been doing this? Have you been wearing your mask? Look, man, I'm telling you something right now. It is looking absolutely ugly in our country in terms of the numbers, y'all. We have not, and I was listening to Dr. Collins, Francis Collins the other day, NIH executive director, and he said that we've been talking about this second wave. He said we've not gotten out of the first wave yet. So I will caution all of you in the audience and your family members and your friends and so forth and your associates, please let them know the numbers in most of our states are going back up, and we've not gotten out of the first wave. Of course, the second wave is what they predicted with the flu season coming on, and of course we're just about in flu season right now. But know that you need to continue to wear your mask. I bring mine with me all the time. I wear it all the time. This thing, despite what you may hear somewhere else, this thing will help save lives. If it doesn't save yours, it's going to help save a neighbor or a friend or just really a person maybe on the streets, or maybe somebody in a meeting, or somebody in transportation that you're riding with or something like that. But just wear your mask and try to social distance. And these social gatherings is what I understand. Some of the spread is coming out of some of the smaller social gatherings. Folks are doing things now at their homes, and they're including a lot more people. And even some of these states that have opened up, they've got quite a few venues and restaurants who have kind of adapted some of the old strategies of doing business, y'all. We can't do business like we used to do back in the day. That is not going to help us right now, especially during this pandemic season. There is a vaccine. They're working on vaccines, and there's some real promising vaccines that are out there. I think Pfizer's doing something. I think there's a couple that have had to stop for a couple of reasons, but I want to make sure that you all know that Dr. Fauci, Dr. Collins, and Dr. Redfield at CDC, they said that they are going to use the utmost of scrutiny before they release anything to the market. So I believe in the scientists, and I hope everybody out there believes in the scientists. I believe we're going to be great. I believe that this country is still a great country, and we are going to do the best we possibly can. Another thing, oh my God, they are still working. They're still working. The thing is not over with yet. There's a possibility still that there may be another stimulus package on the way out there. Small businesses, I've got a cousin of mine who owns a small business. I've got friends who own small businesses, and a lot of these people are still making it marginally. The numbers are not returning back, and I think the economy is bearing that out. Folks are not returning back to the way they shopped before. They're not returning back to restaurants as they did in the past, and that's understandable. You still have people with a lot of fear about going out. But I'll say this. We have got to have stimulus in our country. We've got to get our small businesses back up, and we need to get something in people's pockets because despite the holidays, you got evictions that are on the rise. You got evictions. The releases are coming forth here in the next several weeks. So I hate to see a lot of people get put out of their homes or out of their apartments prior to the holiday season or at any time, right? So let's keep our congressmen, let's keep our senators top of mind, and let's make sure that we reach out to those folks and say, hey, look, we'd love for you to work real in earnest on a stimulus package. I think the president said he would sign it. So if the president says he'd sign it, let's send something to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. That's all I got on that. Hey, look, today's show, I brought in a heavy hitter. And I tell you from time to time, you know, as a great audience that you are here in Funky Politics Land, we've got to be able to grasp a lot of different issues, right? And some of the issues that are really affecting us, not only in COVID, but prior to COVID, is climate change. I've got a very deep expert, Paulo, you guys know this guy. He's been on the show before, Paulo Nunes-Ueno. He is a transportation expert, a transportation policy expert, but this guy knows everything. He is my international guru, and I bring him on the show so we can talk about a lot of things. Today, he's working on some projects in the Seattle area, as a matter in Washington State, talking about climate justice and transportation equity. So don't go anywhere. Stick around. I'll be right back with more and my very special guest, Paulo Nunes-Ueno, right here on Funky Politics.
Welcome back to Sell or Fail. If you ain't selling,
you failing.
You know it, baby. Let's get this money.
And today we have Justin Green, new author of Getting to the Green Sales. What attracted you to sales?
Like how they always say, if I was one teacher or something that changed your outlook on stuff. And this dude here, Fred Landis, I never forget his name. Man, changed my outlook on what I want to do in life and everything.
It's air and opportunity. Go suck up the air while you taking that opportunity.
The worst thing you can do is try and count somebody else's pocket. Like that was one of the biggest mistakes.
Sales is the great equalizer.
Let's get this money. KUDZUKIAN fans, this is your host, Samuel Nelson, with the Sell or Fail podcast. And we want you to download that app so you can't miss that next episode.
KUDZUKIAN. Check out all your KUDZUKIAN favorites now. Download the KUDZUKIAN app, available on Android and iOS.
Hey, I am back. I am DC, the proud host of Funky Politics. And look, I got my good friend here with us, y'all. We got Paulo Nunes-Ueno out of Seattle, Washington. Hey, Paulo,
Hey,
how are you,
DC.
brother?
I'm all right. Thanks for having me.
Oh, man, all the time. Those are some of the snazziest glasses
You
I've
like
ever
that?
seen on anybody. Man, it's my time. I don't know if I can do blue, though. I need to get me a new pair of glasses. Man, hey, it's so great to have you on the program again, Paulo. And I want to get right to this thing. A very serious subject. I think that a lot of us have talked about some other issues in our communities that are facing us. Of course, intrinsic poverty is around our country at an increasing rate. And, of course, COVID has led to a lot of that. But before we get into the subject matter of such, I want you're in Seattle, and a lot of us in the South or the East or even the Midwest, we've seen these photos of the areas in Seattle and in Portland where it looks like there is this ongoing violent, whatever, commotions that are going on or protests. I don't want to call them protests because people are expressing their right to protest, which is a right to do, right? But they're showing some of the, I think some of the media is showing some of the more negative pieces. But how is it? You're on the ground in Seattle there. How is it going?
Well, I mean, I think the thing that people should remember is that this protests were happening. People were speaking out, but there was a big community piece of that as well. So when I went, and my 13-year-old daughter and I went up there in the part of Seattle that was the center of the protest, it looked like this. It looked like a street fair, frankly. There were booths. There was the kind of a community kitchen. There were there was kind of a coffee conversation corner where people had put a bunch of couches together. There was Cal Anderson Park. There was an interesting thing going on when we were there. There was a kind of sort of healing and I don't know, kind of support action going on, and they were asking that folks that weren't African American didn't go into the center of the play field, so that that there would be sort of a safe space for a few hours there. And so, I think it's really easy, and obviously that's the way that news works and how the way the television works to portray the something as violent or as civil unrest. But I think that there were flashes of that happening, but the majority of it were people coming together and organizing and making their voices heard. When we were there, we saw a civil disobedience training happening. So there was a gentleman who was teaching, bunch of people, maybe 2 or 3 dozen people, sort of how to go limp when you resist arrest, or how to sit down, and so it was a nonviolent protest that we saw. So so we went to the grocery store and we bought some food and we bought some drinks and we dropped it off at the communal kitchen, and there was another father and daughter on their bikes also that were doing that. And so I certainly didn't spend days and days and nights there. I only sort of visited, but what I saw was a bunch of people speaking out for justice and speaking out for their rights, and it looked nothing like what
was portrayed.
Sure.
Well, I don't want to stay here too long because we got a lot of heavy lifting to do. But I think what you explained to our audience was that really there was almost a sense of community and a community that was a safe space and that was very supportive. And I want to make sure that people understand that cities like Seattle and Portland, there's not a large or a huge community of African Americans that live in these cities, right? And so to see all of these allies get together and push forth what we consider to be social justice, man, is a winner to me, right?
Yeah, I thought it was a really hopeful
Wow.
thing to see. I was really inspired. There was a lot of murals, there was a lot of art. Um, it was also an interesting thing in that, there was this sort of negotiation with the city that was happening. The city put in some barricades that divided one of the streets in half and changed so that cars were going one way, and then the other side there were the tents for the medics, the tents for the food kitchen, and kind of a pedestrian area where it was sort of like a fair atmosphere. So, I'm sure, obviously, there was an incidence of violence, but there's violence going on all the time in Seattle. Like we were just talking about before the show. Murders have been going up in Seattle. There's been flashes of violence, but what I saw was a big community gathering.
Wow. And, of course, social justice, even in its greatest form, sometimes can't stop, what's inevitable, some of the domestic issues that we have in our country, right? But that's on a whole nother level. That's another show, Paul. That's a whole nother show. Let's get into this thing. I want to talk, and I really teased our listeners and, of course, our viewers with this climate change piece. How in the world do we get communities of color really engaged? Because from what I see, and just being, basically here in the South, I really don't see a lot of people that look like me that are really, really involved very deeply in this climate change, climate justice piece. Because number one, it really disproportionately affects a lot of us in our communities, right?
That's right. That's right. Well, I think, DC, that's changing. That particularly as young people's leadership is concerned. That some of the leaders of the Sunrise Movement and other movements are people of color, and but I think that I'm working with an organization here in Washington State that's really focused on that. How do we put communities of color in the driver's seat when it comes to finding solutions to our climate crisis and making environmental justice by creating solutions that focus on equity. And and I'm a consultant with them, so some of the views that I'll express today are not theirs; they're my own. All the views that I'm sharing with you, but it's an amazing organization called Front and Centered, and starting from that understanding that you just said, which is absolutely true, that the communities of color, Black communities, Indigenous communities are the ones that contributed the least to the problem,
Sure.
but are going to be impacted the worst and are suffering the worst right now because of the underlying what we know, the underlying health inequities that exist already because of the sort of racist policies, environmental policies that we've had that put more pollution in Black communities, put more pollutions in Latino communities than they did in the population in general.
Well, and I want to stop you right there because I want to go. There was a statistic that you all mentioned in your slideshow, and I think you all right now are having community meetings. You're having meetings all over the state, right? And you're talking about these equity issues. But there was one I pulled out that Black and Latinos experience 56 to 63% more pollution than they create, where the white experience is 17%.
17% less than they create.
Yes, less than they create. How is that one of those outliers because of some of the communities we live in next to light and industrial, or is it just one of those things where maybe there's got to be an end to this thing? There's got to be a way into this thing, Paulo. Help me unpack that thing, please.
Well, I think that's the natural outcome of generations of racist policies that didn't think that communities of color, that Black people, Latinos, Indigenous people, people of color matter as much. So it's if we have we have this environmental sort of impact, where are we going to put it? Well, we're going to put it in the poorest communities. So one of the pieces of legislation that Front and Center is working on, and is hopefully going to be pushing in the legislature here in Washington State this year, is called the HEAL Act, the Healthy Environment for All Act, which asks environmental legislation, but also the way that we do oversight of polluting industries, to take into account this idea of disproportional or disparate impacts on communities, and go in and redress the past harms. So I think it's really important to make it really clear, to have a clear understanding of this disproportionality of the impacts, right? So another tool that we've been working on, and I think that this is something that should happen nationwide,
Sure.
is a health disparities map. It's a very well researched map, and you can look and say, these communities are being impacted by these particular pollutants, and who are the people who live there? And then downstream from that, how are we going to redress that? How, next time that we go, or who are the polluters that are causing that, and how do we get them to change?
But Paul, isn't that one of the real issues that we have in our country right now? And that's terms of redressing, or in this case, addressing past harms. Even with the Tuskegee study, the Henrietta tax, all of these things that have been placed on. I don't want to go back to slavery, integration, Jim Crow. I mean, there's just so
I think
many
you can go back to
things.
slavery. I mean, these things lead clearly back to slavery.
Sure. But I guess my question also would be, so when does the black community say that now you want to redress these things, but my grandmother, in some of these communities where you've got some of these old chemical plants, and we have several in Memphis, or some of these old Rust Belt states or cities, like the Cincinnatis and the Clevelands, these things have gotten probably into the soil, into the groundwater, and then you tell me, hey, I need a garden in my community, but I'm basically tilling some contaminated soil in some instances, not all, right? Not all, but in some instances. How do we convince African Americans and those other folks, those black and brown folks who live in these really underserved communities, that now we're all for it and we need to help change the trajectory? How do we work on that?
Well, I mean, I think it really starts with organizing, and with understanding and using your voice, and using your power, and saying that we want to come together to change these negative effects of pollution that happened in the past. And it takes a lot of work, and it's not going to happen overnight, but I feel like, to me, when I go speak to the communities that are members of Front and Centered, that Front and Centered is a coalition of organizations led by people of color, with a real focus on creating climate justice, environmental justice, and I'm working with them to develop their transportation policy work. But when I go and talk to communities, I say, look, the backdrop is all of this environmental harm that's happened in the past, but it's also climate change that we're experiencing today, right? Because the thing, it seemed like just a few years ago, it was possible to think, wow, this is something that's really bad that's going to happen in the future. But DC, out here in the West Coast, when the fires were going on,
Sure.
you could not go outside for weeks. And so it's something that's happening now. And then we say, in the foreground, what's happening is the movement for Black lives.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And that is this call to conscience for us to ask whether the structures and the way that we're doing things, whether the structures of power, the structures of government that we have, whether those things are just or whether they're creating more oppression.
Aren't the two kind of inextricably tied to one another? Black Lives Matter, as well as this and social justice and this climate justice piece. I mean, I'm thinking that's what I'm hearing from you, because to me, Black lives can't matter if I live in a neighborhood, Paulo, that has contaminated groundwater, and there has been clusters of cancer, but the EPA or the state or the locals won't address it and say, look, we know we've seen some clusters. You can't tell me. I've got a community in Memphis right now that's off Warford that there's been clusters of cancer. I mean, come on. I mean,
Right.
the number of levels of cancer, this form of cancer is astronomical. But the Superfund monies have been drained. They're dried up. And so no one is putting more money back into the Superfund to clean these communities up. But now you're going back and you're building new development on some of these things. So again, it's a trust factor, and I think in our communities, and I think that's where we're at right now.
Yeah, and I think that it's time for us to use those same tools of saying, is the way that we're doing policing in this country serving us, or is it a tool of oppression and predation and harm? And if it's the latter, then we need to change it.
Sure.
And I think so when you look at environmental regulation, and I'm certainly not an expert on this,
you're
but
an expert guy. Yeah, that's why you're my resident expert.
No, but the tradition has been that you look at environmental regulation and it talks about the environment. Yes. It doesn't talk about people, right?
I hadn't thought about that. Oh my goodness.
And it's time for us to change that. And this is, some of the way that this movement has been working is that we have to get an understanding of how our decisions impact communities and impact people, and make sure that those communities are are front and center, are in the driver's seat of crafting the solutions for those things. But when you look at, for example, the state of Washington has something that's very it is one of the pillars of environmental regulation in our state, called the Growth Management Act, and it talks about critical areas for streams, and it talks about critical areas for fish habitat, and it talks about critical areas for all of these things, and it has these 5 definitions of critical areas, but not one of them is people that are disproportionately impacted by the decisions that we've made in the past, that face an unequal burden of pollution and harm. And that's one of the things that we're working to change, is to say we need to reopen all of these policies that we've had in the past and make sure that people are at the center of this, and that we have an equal treatment of people in the way that we look at the impacts of pollution, look at how we want to build our new economy.
Will you agree to this, though? And this is just a personal opinion. I think that the West Coast, I think what California, Oregon, Washington, and even parts of Nevada have been able to do and I'm talking about 30, 40 years ago, is to codify or put into code, state code, that we will have some protections of lands. But you look at the South, and I think the South allowed the federal government, so to speak, to be the big brother, or I guess the policing agency of what we think is best for our to forbid or to make sure that there is no real negative effects of our water streams and so forth. So the West Coast has always been a leader. Now, you may not have done it perfectly, right? But what does that show about the rest of the country, though, Paulo? That we're behind you guys, and you guys still got some ways to go.
Yeah, no, I think that's right, and we should not be happy with the progress that we've made, because we need to make a lot more progress, and like you're saying, we need community organizations to push on government to demand that we hold polluters accountable, that we have equity, that we take these unequal impacts into account, that we redress the past harms. But then we also need politicians that are going to put these things in place, right?
Yes, that's right.
And I mean, this is crazy, right? Like the headline that I saw the other day, because there's some Republican governor was saying it's just not government's job to make sure that people don't get COVID.
Whoa.
Right. It's just so if that's the starting point, then you're it's that idea of sort of lowering and diminishing the expectations that you can have of your government until it's actually doing nothing. You can expect nothing from your government. So I think that we need to increase our expectations and say, no, we need representation that's actually going to take care of our environment, make sure that our communities are safe, making sure that everybody has equal opportunity.
Well, then that brings me to this next question I got for you, and that's those folks who the climate change deniers. I mean, I don't think that you can sit back and say that, and I won't even talk about the hurricanes. Just talk about the wildfires on the West Coast, California, and your state, and Oregon, how those and parts of the Dakotas and how those states have been ravaged by these wildfires. I mean, but now we have some leaders that say, well, it's a management issue, and it very well could be. Some of it could be a management issue, and then some of it could be that we are really facing some of the hottest days on Earth. But now I heard one politician say, well, 100 years ago, it was as hot. Now, how he knew that 100 years ago, I don't know. Apparently, NOAA was keeping these statistics.
Yeah.
But, again, you got folks who are sometimes, Paulo, at the very head of leadership that will tell you or will say that these things aren't so. And then now you've got you got me and you got you and you got three or four of the people that now that's created some doubt. That's created doubt. And so now I don't know what to believe. Is the earth flat or is it round? Well, they told me it's round, but I never fell off the side of it,
Yeah, I mean, I think people see through that, right? So,
Sure.
DC, to me, the way that that the Trump administrations and Republicans in general have dealt with COVID is the blueprint of how they deal with climate change, right? And so I think that if you remember a few weeks back, and it feels like a million years, but we had this shocking revelation that Trump knew how bad COVID was going to be, but he didn't tell us. Right. He went on the air and said, it's no big deal. It's no big deal. It's just going to be a little flu. It's going to go away because it was convenient for him.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
So I think that we are well within our rights every time we hear from a person who's a conservative politician or who has some relationship to the fossil fuel industry and saying, oh, there's doubt. We don't really know. 100 years ago, the climate was hot, or I've got a snowball in my freezer, therefore there's no climate change. That's the same thing. They know. They understand. They're not stupid people.
Sure.
They're just trying to take advantage of the situation. And, the thing that, when I listen to debates and stuff, like I almost play this drinking game of you're going to hear them deny the facts, refuse to take action, try to take advantage of the situation to make their friends richer, and then turn a difficult situation into a disaster.
Now, how many drinks was that, though? How many absolute drinks?
No, I mean that Pence-Harris debate. You could get.
It was different, wasn't it? It was very different.
No, but so that thing of like denying the facts,
Sure.
Take no action, take advantage of the situation, and make it worse. In the end, is what they did with COVID. That's where we are. That's why we are where we are. and that's what they're doing with climate change, right? We've known about this since the 80s, and we've done zilch.
Well, now, in all likelihood, and of course, the current administration does lay fault with the past administration, which was the Obama-Biden administration, saying that when we got into office, those supplies were depleted. And I'm not defending one way or the other. I think there's a lot of fault to go around everywhere with relationship to how COVID was addressed. But I think the primary piece that you just made a statement on was, first of all, let's level with the American people and let's say to them that this thing is just not going to go away just like in thin air. But speaking of thin air, we got to take a quick break right here, Paulo. Take a quick break. We'll be right back with more funky politics and my musings and Paulo Nunes-Ueno's musings in just a second. We'll be right back, folks.
Greetings and salutations, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome, one and all, to the little show that we like to call Black Nerd Power, BNP if you're nasty. I'm your host, Mr. Richard Douglas Jones, and with me, the co-hosts of Black Nerd Power, Mr. Marcus Seabury.
What's up, my nerd?
Oh, nerd, please. And Ms. Kimber. What's happening, man?
Hi.
All right, first, here is the rage figure.
I love his helmet.
Talking about escapism and like, yo, I'm mad, but I'm tired. Like, is it okay that, like, if instead of going out to protest tonight, I want to sit and watch a movie? I'm just like, hell yeah, it's fine.
A quote-unquote woke romance that features a character that's not being, like, objectified for her body, that does not necessarily mean that that book will not have sex in it.
And I think on that note, we're going to end the show.
KUDZUKIAN. Download the KUDZUKIAN app. Available on Android and iOS.
Hey, I am DC, and I am back here with you here on Funky Politics, and my very special guest, a friend of ours here, Paulo Nunes-Ueno, transportation policy expert, climate change expert, international guru of everything, is with us again here, folks. And Paulo, hey man, we have really kind of dissected this thing a little bit. Some of the work that a group that you're working with right now, front and center, out of Washington, trying to bring about climate justice and transportation equity in Washington. Hopefully, it'll take wings and fly all over from the West Coast out, of course, to the middle of our country, to the south, and of course to the east. But also, I want to make sure that we talk about and we stay there in terms of talking about the citizenry and how we get our citizens more involved, especially citizens of color who may not understand that maybe some of the asthmatic issues that you or your children have could really be air quality issues, right, Paulo? Or it could be that there's something in the air. Well, it's still air quality. So let's go there a little bit about the awareness model that some of our citizens ought to have, especially those in underserved communities.
Well, I'm not a doctor and I'm not a health expert, but the impacts of transportation on asthma in terms of the diesel pollution. So, especially in Memphis, it's something that I think is really important to think about because of the trucking and the shipping industry is a really important factor. But air quality in general, from understanding where those sources are and making sure that we have the policies in place to hold those folks accountable and tracking. It's something that it's not in our everyday vocabulary, but here in the West Coast, when the wildfires were going on, like my wife was, every day we woke up and she turned on her cell phone and said, "What's the air quality index today? Are we going to be able to go outside?" And so that, terrible situation, and it felt awful, but it made me think that we ought to a lot of this starts with awareness for people to be able to then advocate for themselves, is to understand, hey, my community has worst air quality. I mean, DC, it's so frustrating, but it maps exactly to the way that we have segregated along race and income levels, that the places that are browner and blacker and poorer have worse air and worse environmental quality. And that is not an accident.
Well, and I want to stay right there. you said the wife got up and you guys checked air quality. You're on the ground in Seattle, and so if we're seeing this smoke that is filling the air from the wildfires in just California, we're going to talk about just California, and I'm sure they were wafting toward the state of Washington and Oregon. Of course, I think you guys had your own issues up that way. How are you all able to? Oh God, I mean, live. I mean, when you wake up and you see a haze day and there's sun out there somewhere, it had to play on, to me, it had to play on your mental psyche. It had to play on your mental health a little bit. It's almost like living in a city where, I don't want to talk about Alaska, of course, where I think half of the year, maybe 8 or 9 months of the year, most of the day is dark. And you're used to seeing sun, or you used to at least being able to see the rain. How does that air quality, the ability to see in front of you, feel? Can you paint that picture for those of us in this part of the country that were not able to see it or to live that experience?
It was really strange. It's like, it's scary because you never think about this, but you can't get away from the air.
That's right.
So it feels really oppressive. Like you can't go outside. You couldn't go outside even for a few minutes, and it just pressed down on your lungs when you breathe. And we were all cooped up in the house because of COVID anyways, and then going outside to be able to walk around the block was sort of this mental health break that we had. Or my son has a lot of energy, and we have a trampoline in the back, and he would go and bounce on the trampoline and couldn't do that. And it's this really eerie feeling of not being I don't want to sort of exaggerate it, but it's in the back of your mind. You're like, are we going to be able to live here long term? Is the feeling that you have, because you just can't imagine. What if the fire season lasts all month? What if it lasts months? Then we just like COVID has totally upended our lives in terms of not in the beginning, not sure whether you can go to the store, or not sure whether like basic stuff, am I going to have toilet paper? And so it feels like the summer in the West Coast might have that kind of emergency sort of feeling to it, in that you're going to need to prepare for not leaving your house for days on end.
I was listening to an interview by one of the policy experts with the Bureau of Land Management, and they were admitting to the fact that maybe how we have addressed the wildfires that do crop up on an annual basis in our western states, that maybe we've been thinking about that all wrong. Maybe we need to get to the point where we are able to live with the fact that wildfires are going to occur. It was in the program on NPR, and it was a very interesting interview, and I listened to her, and I never thought about it that way. She said, we've been attacking this thing from we've got to have firefighters going here, we got to fight this thing as it crops up, but we need to make sure that when we build in those areas that we take into account that there is really a possibility that a wildfire could occur in this hot spot right here. And so I thought that was pretty interesting. And you're talking to a person who has never been to the Redwoods, right? But I do follow a lot of what's happening out there on the West Coast. And of course, our prayers are with you guys out there, and how to even try to manage to get up every day and see a brighter day, right? With things like that. And I want to go back to transportation and the inequity in transportation in a lot of our southern cities in states versus where you have in the northern above the Rust Belt, right there, the Rust Belt, you have a network. You have a network on the West, but why was there never any real thought put into a real network in the South other than federal passenger train like Amtrak?
Well, I mean, I think we can't discount how important and how useful, how really transformative a good bus network can be for a community.
Sure.
When we think about the Montgomery bus boycott, for example,
yes.
that when though when African Americans were asking to be treated equally on the buses, it was because, number one, it's dignity, but number two, it was an important part of an everyday person's everyday life. It was a useful service that people depended on. And over the course of the last 50 or 60 years, we've been systematically undermining those systems, those bus systems, and leaving communities stranded. So I think that the when you talk about the kind of heavy rail subway systems in Chicago or New York, and that has to do with big dense cities and being able to support those systems. But I think that 50 or 60 years ago, when the civil rights movement was happening, those communities, one, were better served with transportation than they are now, even though it was totally racist and segregated. The actual service, there was more bus service. You went to more places, and we've since then kind of communities have spread out, and we've stopped the public investment in the public transportation systems. So, the Urban Institute has just put out a really cool report that I think that if your readers who are interested in this kind of stuff would be interested in looking up. It's called The Unequal Commute, and it compares 4 different cities in terms of how job access differs by person's racial background. And it's really stark that communities of color have less access to good transportation of all kinds, right? Because there's a clear correlation between income and race in this country, unfortunately. So, Black and brown and indigenous communities less likely to own cars, more likely to depend on transit, more likely to walk, and
exactly right,
and less likely to have safe sidewalks and safe bike lanes in their communities. So
let me stop you right, Paul. Would the premise be that if we had more mixed communities in terms of development, if we had more of that in terms of Black and brown and white and Asian and all of this and indigenous people in communities, would the transportation system, especially the bus system, would it be more equitable versus now when I'm in the suburbs? I basically don't want a bus, and I think some of these studies we have talked about over the years and we worked on together here in Memphis have proven that some out there would be willing to invest, but don't necessarily want a bus in their communities. But I guess would there be a stronger bus system if the communities were more mixed? And you got the guy who's a blue collar worker who's leaving, let's say Germantown, as well as the white collar worker who's going from Germantown to maybe to go work at I don't know, FedEx or something like that.
Yeah, look, I think that there's no question, DC, that it's like we have to fix all of these things at the same time, right?
Yeah,
because kind of unfair and like racially exclusive zoning and community development is an enormous problem, and we have to address that and fix that. And I think at the same time we need to do targeted investments at communities of color to make sure that they have dignified, quality transportation of all kinds. And so I think that they're both pieces of the same problem.
Sure.
Like one of the things that I've been working on is a lot of people are familiar with redlining, right?
Yes, very much so.
Where banks refuse to lend in communities of color, and we as a society have all said, oh, that's horrible, stop doing that, and to some extent that has stopped. But what happens on the transportation side of that is still going on, where 30 states, including Washington State, have these restrictions of where gas tax dollars can be invested, right? So what they say is that gas tax dollars can only go into highway or road uses. So there's not a single penny of that money can go to transit, can go to sidewalks, can go to investments in communities. It has to go to highways. So in a way, what I like to say is that these types of restrictions, that's redlining on wheels. That's saying that, redlining was saying you are saying don't invest in black and brown neighborhoods to the real estate industry. What these restrictions say is don't put public dollars in the transportation infrastructure in those neighborhoods. Let's pave the way to suburban and more white development and only pay for those investments. That in its face, I think it's unfair, but we for some reason have not had a clear conversation about that. But essentially, those two things are a poverty trap, right?
Yes,
where lower income black and brown communities and families are unable to buy an appreciating asset, which is a house, which is the foundation of how American middle class is built, where your house is appreciating. Sure. And you have to then, because your jobs have moved away, in a way partially subsidized by this highway building, you have to spend more of your money on a depreciating asset, which is a car or two or three for the adults in the house to be able to get to their jobs that are getting further and further away. So we need to attack those two things together, right? The land piece and the transportation piece.
Well, let me ask you this then. Has there been any conversations on a federal level? Because we know the gasoline tax. We know there's a federal tax on it, and there's a state tax. We know states are not going to give up their portion. We know that. But the federal taxes that travel to Washington, I don't know, let's just say, I don't know if this administration, there's been a conversation by those people who are policy experts like yourself. Have you had any conversations with people at DOT about how do we get some of those dollars that you are capturing every year on an annual basis all over the country that comes into Washington? We know you need it from a budgetary standpoint, but we need some of those dollars to come back into our communities where we can do more than build a road, because to be honest with you, all that does is you build me a road and you maintain it. That's just for more cars to get there. I mean, how do I help get a very strong system of, as you said again, a bus system that can take more people, and we put less people on the road is still being used, all right?
Right,
but you're putting less cars on it, which helps us from an emission standpoint.
Well, so I think that's exactly the point, DC, is we have to start over, right? We have to look like we were talking about at the beginning. We have to ask ourselves, is the way we're doing things now fair and just, or is it a legacy of a racist past? Whoa. And I think that when you look at the way that we have funded transportation, so 80 cents of every dollar that's coming from the federal government that's going to states must be spent on highway uses. And oftentimes the way that the sort of incentive structure is built, it's not spent on maintaining stuff that we need, that we already built. It's building new stuff, right? So we need
new on-ramps. I mean,
right, exactly. So I think that your question goes right to the heart of the matter. Hopefully, we'll see a new administration. Hopefully, we'll have a lot of new thinking about how do we address the actual situation that's happening instead of just denying the facts. But the two primary questions we need to be asking is, are these things fair? Is it leading to more equality? And is it capable of addressing our pressing, other existential issue of the climate crisis? And if the answer is no on either of those things, then we need to start over again and think of new policies, new structures, new agencies, I really feel like, inspired by the movement for Black Lives, inspired by what we're seeing in terms of the climate crisis in our faces, we need to think about this time as a third Reconstruction. Whoa, as a second Reconstruction.
Whoa.
Right? Like the Reconstruction at its core, as I understand it, and I'm certainly no scholar of this, but I'm really interested in it, and I'm reading it. It's just saying this is fundamentally unequal and didn't work the way that we were doing this. We have to create new structures of power in order to make a better world. That's and I think that's what the Green New Deal is speaking to.
Sure. And maybe we ought to think about also, and let's just say there is a new administration that comes on board. And I don't know that, well, I can tell you right now from a policy standpoint, I have not seen many new policies from the current administration that would address equity in our transportation system, either from a rail system or a bus.
I mean, DC, come on, you got to stop barking up that tree.
Can you let me soft pedal this thing?
They don't have policies.
This is funky politics, and of course I got to be as partial and as neutral as possible. Okay, let's just say they have no policy. Let's just say there's a new administration. So then you got one. I've had this idea and had this epiphany. Why don't we capture all of those building projects and come up with a new department? There's nothing that said you can't do it. Maybe a Department of Infrastructure, and you got a secretary of, and his or her job is to ensure that we rebuild America. Now, of course, I think Vice President Biden talks about building back better, but when you think about it, a Department of Infrastructure, we take all of that stuff out of DOT, we take all of it out of Corps of Engineers, and we got it in one place.
I would go one further. This is the mega department that I have in mind. So you put EPA, Commerce, Transportation, and and Energy all together.
Whoa!
Because yeah, so essentially you say this is how we're going to address our climate crisis and provide equity at the same time. That's why Commerce is in there. But that's what I'm saying. This kind of conversation is exactly what we need to be having. It's like, okay, fine, that's the way we used to do stuff, and there were reasons for it. Some of those reasons were just flat out racism, but in any regard, it's not working anymore. So what are the new things that we need to build to deliver the stuff that we know that we need? And start from that. Is it going to make a more equal world, and is it going to drive down our climate change gases?
Well, and you hit on one subject I don't want to get out of here before we talk about it, and that's coal and oil. Since the embargo of 73, 74, we have now we have the largest reserves of any country in the world. We have our own system. We started out where they wanted to get, I think, 1 million to 1 billion barrels, and we've far exceeded that. So we have more oil now in our country, located here in the States, than anywhere else in the world. And we don't talk about gas with the fracking and all of that. Natural gas. We are the leader in natural gas right now. And then, of course, coal. Our president now is talking about bringing coal back. I don't think coal ever went anywhere, but I think that those owners and those people who were in the coal business decided that, I don't know if I need coal to fire an engine anymore because, I can use gas. I got diesel, so somebody needs to talk to them about that. But these industries are going to fight tooth and nail. They're going to fight tooth and nail to keep those dollars from coming back out of D.C. to the States to go into some of these projects that you and we've just decided that this is what's going to happen. Have they been given just too much leeway over the last 100 years?
Yeah, no question.
Sure.
But you know what? Time is up. We can't do that anymore.
Well,
we just need to. I think and I think what we need to do is to just start the timer, saying, 6 more years, no more coal. 10 more years, no more oil. And let's figure out the alternative. And how are we going to take care of the workers who work in that industry? DC, in a way, it's like COVID has been the great teacher.
It has,
right?
Hasn't it?
Like when we needed to, we went and we created trillions of dollars of rescue packages,
Sure.
right?
Sure did.
And it was and Republicans voted for it, and we passed it through. And you know what? Do we want to live in this planet? Yes, we want to live in this planet. How much do we need to figure out a rescue package to create a transition for the workers that work in the oil industries and just create a way for them to transition to something else and pay their salaries for X number of years? I don't know, but what I do know is that we're coming up to $4-6 trillion potentially that are going to rescue this economy. Yeah. The whole Green New Deal, it was, people made a big deal. It was going to be $2 trillion. Yeah. So if there's a will, there's a way. And I think we need to generate the will. And we need, in my mind, we say, well, hey, DC's got a nuclear reactor in his backyard. And well, no, he doesn't, because that's going to hurt a lot of people. And so there's all kinds of ways that we manage nuclear material. Hopefully in 20 years, that's what carbon fuels are going to be like, right? Yeah. We're going to use it a little bit, but it's going to be really, really tightly controlled, because it's poison for us. Sure. It's like we have to start treating it like it's poison. It's killing us. It's going to keep us from being able to live on this planet. So, I know it'll be more convenient for people to continue fracking in the way that they like to do it, because it makes a little money, because they invested all this infrastructure in doing it this way. But you know what? We can't do it anymore. And we're smart. We're an innovative species. We'll figure it out once we decide that this is an important enough problem. And I think that the time is now.
You know what, Paulo, I've enjoyed you being on the program. I want you to end with this one piece before we get out of here. You and I, we had a conversation before. We talked about work. And I tell people this all the time. Anybody I talk to, I said, I talked to an interesting man. And he said, work. He said, is work where we go, or is it what we do? I'm going to leave that with you there, Paulo. What do you think about that? Has that changed any since you've been home now? And a lot of these folks who have careers in the tech industry, they've been working from home now?
Yeah, I think that remember when there were 43 different Democrats running for the during the primary, and Andrew Yang was talking about a sort of guaranteed basic income. Sure. And I feel like, maybe that's an idea whose time has come, right? Because if you don't have to go outside and expose yourself to go and pull espresso shots in order to make your rent, and you can take a week or 2 or 3 off if you're sick with COVID, then maybe we would have had less of an enormous COVID explosion, right? So that idea of our relationship to work is something that we need to think about in the future, right? Do you need to work because it's meaningful to you, because it brings you inspiration, it brings you connection to your community, because you're providing something valuable for other people, or do you need to work to just keep the lights on so that you have the basics? And I think that if the answer was the former, then we'd be more resilient as a society, right? And we'd just be happier and healthier.
Man, I'm going to tell you something. You're going to get you a church out there in Seattle, buddy, because you're preaching a good word. You hear me? You're preaching a good word. Hey, man, Paulo Nunes-Ueno, man, thanks a lot again for blessing our listeners and our audience with your knowledge, because, we're all in this thing together, black, brown, white, Asian. It doesn't matter. We're all in this thing together the way we look at it here. And I know you look at it that way. We only have one planet that I know of that we can live on right now. There may be some others out there in the stratosphere somewhere, but right now, Earth is it. And if we don't take care of the Earth we have now, what do we have left for our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren? What do we have for them left, Paulo? And that's the way I look at this thing, man. That's the way I look at it.
That's right. That's
hey,
right.
Hey, appreciate everybody being on the show. We're going to call you. We're going to get you back on here again after, let's just say what happens after January. If there's a change in the White House, we need to really talk a lot of policy. Let's talk about some of those things that's going to go forward and some of those recommendations I know that you guys at Front and Center are going to be making, okay?
All right. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, buddy. We'll see you later. I'll be right back with some closing thoughts here on Funky Politics.
Take care.
KUDZUKIAN.
So we're talking about actual harm against actual people.
Different episodes, you come up with a more surprising thing.
You just taking baby steps, talking about escapism and like, yo, I'm mad, but I'm tired.
Hello. It is a privilege and an honor to join you for this special ceremony.
I can't tell you how privileged and pleased I am to be a part of the most critical conversation of 2020.
Sickle cell disease from birth to childhood up. So thank you for joining us.
KUDZUKIAN. Check out all your KUDZUKIAN favorites now. Download the KUDZUKIAN app, available on Android and iOS.
Hey guys, let me tell you something. This is what I live for. I live for these conversations we have with these experts. We're not going to bring anybody here to talk to you about any policy or any way forward if they don't know what they're talking about. Paulo Nunes-Ueno knows his stuff. He is a transportation policy expert, guru, international. He's married, so he's not an international playboy. He's a great guy, and he's doing a lot of great work with this new group at Front and Center in Washington, trying to move the needle in terms of equity, in terms of climate justice, as well as transportation equity. And he's done some work for us here in the South, and we're going to get him back this way when it's safe to travel again, hopefully. But you know what? I want to make sure you do one thing before we get out here. Make sure you understand COVID-19 is not going anywhere at all. Anywhere at all. Continue your social distancing. Let's cut down on the gatherings. I know it's going to hurt because the holidays are coming up, but we got to cut down on those gatherings. We are hurting right now. The numbers are skyrocketing everywhere all over the country. Wear your mask. Wash your damn hands. Wash those hands 1,000,000 times a day if you have to until they're just dry. And, of course, social distance. I am DC. I am the host of Funky Politics, and I will see you the very next time.